In our last episode, the Iron Sultan, Mahmud II, was laid to rest. He had torn down the Janissaries, rebuilt armies, drafted decrees, and invited Europe into his empire's bloodstream. But he died unfinished, his reforms incomplete, his empire battered, his fleet defected. What he left behind was not stability, but survival, which now fell into the hands of a boy. 16 years old, European-educated, gentle in nature, Abdulmecid would try to rule a crumbling empire. But would his vision bring a new golden age, or strip away what little sovereignty remained? This is Road to Destruction, the World Wars. Mahmud II's death was announced with cannon fire across the Bosphorus. The city mourned, but uneasily. His funeral was spectacle and warning at once. The empire could still project grandeur, yet beneath the robes and prayers was a darker truth. The Ottoman state was fragile. The empire's last strong sultan was gone. Onto the throne stepped a boy of 16, Abdulmecid. Abdulmecid's childhood had been shaped not by soldiers or campaigns, but by books and tutors. His mother, Sultan, guided him with quiet discipline and a devotion to piety and charity. From her he absorbed an instinct for generosity, the kind of ruler who built schools and hospitals, who gave coins to the poor. From her he inherited a heart. From his father he inherited a burden, unfinished reforms, and an empire with wolves at the gates. The young prince studied Arabic and Persian, but also French, the first Ottoman heir to master it fluently. He read newspapers from Paris, absorbed the language of diplomacy, and dreamed in European idioms. Ambassadors whispered that here was a boy who could bridge two worlds. Reformers in the palace dared to hope he might continue Mahmud's vision without his father's iron. Courtiers called him gentle, curious, impressionable, a scholar prince, more at home with poetry than politics. For reformers, this made him the perfect vessel. For conservatives, it made him weak. For Europe, it made him vulnerable. And Europe was already circling. To the north, Russia watched. To the west, Britain and France weighed their interests. The Eastern question, would the Ottoman Empire survive, and who would inherit it if it did not, had become the obsession of every cabinet in Europe. In this moment of fear, Abdulmecid inherited not a crown of power, but a seat of dependency. He was greeted with two expectations that would define his reign. Reformers demanded he continue his father's path, building a state strong enough to survive. Europe demanded he continue reform as performance, proof that the Ottomans were civilized, worthy of protection, pliable enough to be managed. To rule meant balancing both. The boy Sultan began with gestures of conciliation. He promised to uphold his father's decrees, listened intently to his ministers, and leaned heavily on men like Mustafa Reshid Pasha, a diplomat fresh from London and Paris who believed the empire's only chance lay in adopting European models of governance. Already the Tanzimat, the reorganization, was taking shape in embryo, with Abdulmecid as its willing figurehead. But the empire he inherited was not simply reforming, it was unraveling. In Syria, in Kurdistan, in the Balkans, provinces stirred uneasily. In the capital, Janissary ghosts haunted a new army still brittle from defeat. In the palace, conservatives muttered that reforms had brought only humiliation, and clerics warned that aping Europe would destroy the empire's soul. The Sultan was not yet a man, but the weight of centuries sat upon his shoulders, and to the southeast, Muhammad Ali's banners still flew, a reminder that the empire's greatest enemy was not yet done. Prior to his death, Mahmud gambled on one last campaign against Egypt. In 1839, Ottoman forces marched east to break Muhammad Ali's grip on Syria. Once the Sultan's most ambitious governor, now ruled more like a rival monarch. He had taken Syria, humbled Ottoman garrisons, and built an army drilled by French officers, clothed in European uniforms, and commanded by his son, Ibrahim Pasha, a general as brilliant as he was ruthless. Advisors from Europe, even the young Prussian officer Helmuth von Moltke, rode with the army. On paper, this was a reformed force, drilled, reorganized, clad in new uniforms. But on the field at Nizip, appearance collapsed into reality. Ibrahim Pasha's veterans shattered them in a single day. The modernized Ottoman army broke, and with it broke the illusion that reforms alone could save the empire overnight. The irony was bitter. The Egyptians fought with European skill, funded and trained by French officers. The Ottomans fought with European advisors too, Moltke among them, yet their reforms were half-finished, their soldiers unready. It was not just an Ottoman defeat. It was a European duel fought with Ottoman and Egyptian blood. By the time news of the disaster reached Istanbul, Mahmud was already on his deathbed. He died as his armies lay in ruins, leaving a 16-year-old heir to inherit not just the throne, but a war already lost. Syria was gone, Egypt stood triumphant, and the last hope of reversing Ottoman decline by force had collapsed. Worse still, Europe's shadow already loomed over the battlefield. With France backing Muhammad Ali, Britain and Austria leaned towards the Ottomans, not out of friendship, but to block French influence. Russia watched hungrily for weakness. Even before Abdulmecid raised his hand to swear his oaths, his empire was already the prize in a proxy war. Survival would no longer be decided only in Istanbul or on the battlefield, but in the drawing rooms of London, Paris, Vienna, and St. Petersburg. At 16, Abdulmecid stood before his court in robes too large, his voice soft but determined. He swore to protect his people, to continue his father's work, to be a ruler for a new age. But his words carried an echo of desperation. This empire could no longer save itself alone. Survival meant alliances. Reform meant entanglement. Sovereignty meant compromise. Whether he could hold it together or whether Europe would hold it for him remained to be seen. And as the empire reeled from defeat on land, an even greater humiliation waited at sea. In our next episode, The Fleet That Betrayed Its Empire, the Ottoman navy sails into Alexandria and never returns. Panic grips the capital, the empire begs Europe for salvation, and the pattern of rescue that feels like occupation begins. This is Road to Destruction, The World Wars. Abdulmecid.